A curious coalition has taken centre stage now, not on the West End or on the BBC, but in the political theatre of British welfare reform. Actors Stephen Fry, Stanley Tucci, Brian Cox, Arlene Phillips, Rosie Jones, and others have spoken out forcefully against the government's proposed 5 billion cuts to sickness and disability benefits. Their message is stark. These reforms, far from streamlining the system, risk deepening hunger, humiliation, and hardship for the most vulnerable in society. And we need to begin with the facts. The Work and Pensions Secretary, Liz Kendall, who announced this major restructuring of personal independence payments, PIP, and cracking down on benefits given to people with long-term physical or mental health conditions, those conditions that limit their ability to live independently. The government hopes to save billions by tightening eligibility, with between 800,000 and 1.2 million claimants expected to lose support altogether. It's a financial move dressed in managerial jargon, streamlining, refining, refocusing, but the reality is both visceral and brutal. These are not abstract savings. These are real, lived realities for disabled people who rely on those payments to eat, to heat their homes, to maintain a semblance of dignity. And why have Stephen Fry and Dame Arlene Phillips entered the fray? After all, this is not their usual domain, but that, I think we should argue, is precisely the point. When prominent public figures, many of whom enjoy significant privilege, step forward to denounce a policy, it signifies that something has gone profoundly awry. Now, I know that Stephen Fry is a very principled man and thinks deeply about things. I remember Stephen Fry from many, many years ago, and he is always a deep thinker. In fact, I during a rather low ebb when I was stuck on a mountainside in Greece, I was rather heartened by letters that he sent, and he'd made a point of typing in Greek characters on the envelope. I thought that was so thoughtful, and we met many years earlier in he wrote a play that I did in Oxford, and I remember meeting him vividly, and thinking that this is a man who thinks deeply. It's not virtue. He's not a virtue signaler. He's not virtue signaling, as some cynics would suggest. He is signaling virtue. He is a genuinely virtuous man. This is an Aristotelian idea that you make a habit of trying to do the right thing, and you become virtuous. The word virtuous, it's slightly insulting from a sort of feminist point of view, but the word virtuous comes from the Latin word vir, which means man. So you become more of a man, more of a human being, by practicing, by habitually doing what is right. It's drawing attention to an ethical boundary here that shouldn't be crossed. And Sir Stephen Fry, who's long spoken candidly about his struggles with bipolar disorder, reminds us that the welfare state is not a charitable add-on, it's the bedrock of a civilized society. Cuts should be for people who can best afford them, not for disabled people who are amongst the most vulnerable and overlooked. And his words are not radical, they are in fact the quiet voice of decency in a cacophony of cost-cutting. The welfare state, he argues, should be built on justice and compassion, not suspicion and spreadsheet-driven cruelty. And Dame Arlene Phillips from Strictly Come Dancing, she calls the reforms shameful. And she's right. There's something deeply ignominious in a government, particularly one that stars itself as a progressive Labour administration, looking out for the working class, presiding over policy choices that force disabled people to food banks. And pause on that image for a moment. Food banks. Stanley Tucci, the American actor who's lived in Britain for years, said it best. It breaks my heart to know that so many people in a country as wealthy and developed as the UK are experiencing hunger. And he's right to be heartbroken. We've become inured to the phrase cost of living crisis as though it were a weather pattern or an inevitable economic tide. But hunger in the United Kingdom is not inevitable. It was never inevitable. It's the direct result of political choices, the wrong political choices, the wrong leadership. Brian Cox, star of Succession, echoed this sentiment, stating that food bank dependency is a stain on this country. He's spoken about this before, and about his own childhood in poverty, and he understands that dignity once lost is hard to recover. To cut PIP in this context is not merely cruel, it's economically illiterate. For every pound taken from someone with disability, we lose far more in social cohesion, productivity, and long-term health costs. And here is where I would pivot to the wider question, why now? Why has this government chosen this moment, in the middle of inflation, NHS backlog, stagnant wages, to target people on disability support? The answer, I suspect, lies in an increasingly desperate search for savings without alienating the higher tax bracket. By targeting benefits, the government can claim to be responsible stewards of the economy while avoiding the political risk of raising income tax or capital gains. But this is not fiscal responsibility, it's moral abdication. We should also take a moment to consider the nature of the proposed reforms. The Department for Work and Pensions argues that some people are being overdiagnosed with mental health conditions and receiving benefits that they don't need. The implication is that benefits are too easy to access, that fraud is widespread, that sickness is in many cases a psychological convenience. Well, the fraud is in the people who ran the post office, the Horizon stuff. The fraud is in the PIP, the other PIP nonsense managed by Matt Hancock with his friends Michelle Mone and so on. That's where the fraud is, not in the ordinary people who are struggling to survive. This is a dangerous and deeply stigmatizing narrative, that you've got two sorts of poor, the deserving and the... We've been there before. This casts suspicion on the very people the system is designed to support. Rosie Jones, the comedian and disability rights campaigner with cerebral palsy, put it plainly. Disabled people are scared of what the future holds, and frankly, they've got good reason to be. A benefit system should provide not just money, but security. And what's unfolding now is the opposite. We are in a precarious position, and that has become institutionalized. Now, some might argue that celebrity interventions have limited impact, that famous actors live in privilege and cannot truly understand hardship. But I argue this misses the point. Public figures have platforms, and when they lend their voice to a cause that doesn't benefit them directly, it lends weight and visibility to issues too often buried in the fine print of fiscal statements by the Chancellor and her buddies. Moreover, this is not merely about individual celebrities. The campaign is backed by the Trussell Trust, the anti-poverty charity that oversees a vast network of food banks across the UK. They've witnessed firsthand the human fallout from austerity and cuts, and their data shows that benefit issues, delays, sanctions, reductions are among the leading drivers of food bank use. If we cut disability benefits, we're not solving a problem, we're outsourcing it to charities and volunteers already stretched beyond capacity. One might also consider the political implications for Labour. It is, after all, a Labour government, or rather a Labour opposition that's become a government that was crying out against the cost of living crisis that appears to be acquiescing to these cuts. Keir Starmer has thus far refused to rule out benefit reductions, preferring to focus on fiscal credibility. But credibility is not merely a matter of numbers, it's a matter of values. And when a Labour government begins to echo the language of Osborne-era austerity, it risks losing not only its moral compass, but its electoral base. And getting that back may prove to be a problem. So what should be done? First, the cut should be reversed. There's still time to rethink the policy before it's fully implemented. Secondly, we must challenge the narrative that welfare is a drain on society. In truth, it's a form of social insurance, an investment in human dignity. And third, we must stop pitting the deserving and the undeserving poor against each other. Poverty is not a character flaw, disability is not a lifestyle choice, and hunger should not be a political strategy. Then we need to rethink what we're doing with immigration. And we need to recognise that refugees can offer something to our country, and they should be encouraged and enabled to make that offering, to commit themselves to our country, to pay tax, to help that burden. The idea that we are keeping refugees in limbo and keeping disabled people in poverty is absurdity. It is an absurdity in a civilized country. The way we demonstrate the level of our civilization is by the way we treat people who are less well off. To quote Stanley Tucci again, things don't have to be this way. Indeed, they don't. But unless we speak up, unless those with platforms use them and those without are heard, then the cuts will go ahead, the food banks will overflow, and another generation of Britons will learn that illness is not only a personal burden, but a bureaucratic punishment. We need to remember that civilization, this is the point, is judged not by the number of millionaires it produces, but how it treats those with the least. And the welfare state is not a luxury, it's a promise. And promises, like reputations, are easy to shred and much harder to repair.